Today we're back on the battlefields of World War I, the Great War, and today we've come to the end of the front line. The race to the sea ended here, and the trenches literally ran into the beach and into the edge of the sea. Today we're exploring Nieuwpoort. At the beginning of August 1914, the Germans invaded Belgium, and despite some valiant defensive attempts at places like Liège and Namur, the Germans advanced towards Antwerp very, very quickly. The British had concerns about what would happen with the coastal ports if the Germans advanced much further, so they moved in to try to support the Belgians. Men of the Royal Naval Division moved in to help defend Antwerp. Despite a valiant defence, the Germans started to move into the outskirts of Antwerp on the 9th of October. And very soon after, the city had to be abandoned. That meant that the Belgian line had to retreat further back, and it ended up here at Nieuwpoort. This is where the front lines were established and where the trenches started to be dug and the race to the sea had officially ended. Well, over the next few videos, we're going to be exploring the area around Nieuwpoort and telling some of the stories of what happened here. It's a really, really interesting place. The trenches literally ran into the sands here on this coastline, and people often wonder what happened beyond that, and the very simple answer is there was then kind of a naval blockade on both sides, British and German, to defend the either end of the trench lines. Often people think, well, couldn't you just go around it in the sea? And funnily enough, that was something that was thought about, and we're going to talk about that in this series of videos. Really looking forward to this. We're going to explore Nieuwpoort and see what there is to learn here. So we've just come a little bit further along the canal from where we started the video. We were down on the edge of the coast down there, and we've just come down to here. So the Belgians had retreated back and had dug in their trenches along the northern side of the canal. We're on the southern side just now. They were on the northern side over there. But this time they'd been reinforced by French troops, but the Germans launched their attack here on the 18th of October. The idea being that they wanted to deprive the British access to Calais, Dunkirk, Boulogne, and they felt that taking these ports, these coastal areas, was absolutely essential. So they launched wave after wave of attack into the Belgian and French defences here. So just to orientate ourselves slightly again, so the coast is just down there to our left. So at this stage, the Germans were attacking from straight on ahead of us. And on the far side of the canal there, the Belgians, reinforced by the French 42nd Division, had built their defences. The Germans were coming in vast, vast numbers, and things were looking bleak here. It almost felt inevitable that the Germans were going to overrun these positions and take Nieuwpoort and then have access to move further down the coast. It was getting to a stage where it was felt that something fairly drastic had to be done, and that's exactly the decision that was made. Now I've just moved a little further into the centre of Nieuwpoort along the Isar Canal here. Now by the 25th of October things were looking desperate, and in fact the decision was made, what might feel like a fairly extreme decision, to attempt to flood this entire area to halt the German advance. The idea being, if you could flood a large enough area, it would make it very difficult for German infantry to advance and to bring their equipment through, therefore stalling the German attack. And the plan to do that was going to take place right here. This is where the sluice gates are that link to the canal, and the idea would be to open these gates and flood this entire region. So unfortunately, the wind noise here was unbelievable. So you guys have got voiceover Rob for this clip. So where we're looking at here, that's where the water inlet comes in from the coastline to this area here, where the sluice gates are that protect the area from flooding. There's one there, and ultimately that then joins onto the Isar Canal, which runs all the way down towards Ypres. I think there's 5 gates in this area. And across on the other side, you can see the memorial to King Albert. The King of Belgium at the time, who ordered this action to go ahead. Now, the problem was the gatekeepers had long left this area, and so a couple of locals stepped up to help. One by the name of Hendrik Gerhardt. He was actually a 51-year-old retired skipper who was working in this area for the Nieuwpoort Council. Then also Karel Cog, who was a local who worked for the Water Board. And they offered to help come up with a plan to make this happen, using their local knowledge of A, how these gates worked, and B, the process they could follow in order to try to flood the local land area. So by the 29th of October, the Germans had advanced right up to this area, and the command was given to put this plan into action. So Karel Cog's plan put into action mostly by Heinrich Gerhardt, who moved up into this area. Now, bear in mind, he's a 51-year-old retired skipper. He moved up here with some of the Belgian troops. And he was under the watch of the Germans, so this had to be done, very, very carefully. And they started to open these sluice gates, the idea being that that would then slowly flood the marshland heading inland from this area just here. So that happened. That was put into action on the 29th of October, and the flooding started to head out into the marshland beyond Nieuwpoort. So despite those floodwaters growing, the Germans attacked again here on the Isar front on the 30th of October. Here at Ramskapelle, they managed to move forwards and capture part of the village. The Belgians launched a big counterattack through this area as well, holding off that German attack. The Germans realised that with those floodwaters rising around them, they had no choice but to pull back. The Belgians had successfully managed to hold off this corner of Belgium, and the Germans were not going to be able to capture it. Their German advance had stopped, the front lines were established, the race to the sea was over, and the front lines were settled in across this area in 1914. Now, after some of those decisive actions further inland at Ramskapelle, this sector actually became fairly quiet for a period of time. It was held by the Belgians and the French, and in fact the British wouldn't return to this section until June 1917. They were going to be doing that in preparation for a planned attack. It was going to be part of the Third Battle of Ypres, so it would push forwards in autumn 1917. Planned for slightly earlier than that originally, and the British were going to launch a very ambitious amphibious attack in behind the German defences, just slightly further up the coast. The problem was that as the British moved in here and the 32nd Division took over the lines here from the French, the Germans saw what was going on, and they launched a large preemptive strike. They fully suspected that a British attack was coming here, and they correctly guessed that there might be an amphibious landing being planned. And so at 5:30 a.m. on the 10th of July, they launched their own heavy offensive right into this area. Now, of course, at this stage, the British were dug into the former Belgian-French trenches, which were on the northern side of the canal. So right now we're on the southern side by Nieuwpoort. The trenches where the British were defending were on the northern side of the canal, and they were going to come under a heavy German bombardment, followed by wave after wave of highly experienced German stormtroopers. Okay, so looking straight ahead of us here, the Germans were attacking head on, and the British were defending the positions along the trench line on the other side of the canal. So early morning, 10th of July, the Germans launched that massive artillery bombardment, and that also included the use of the horrendous mustard gas. That was used for the first time here in that barrage. They used the artillery to take out the bridge crossings across the river here. And so in fact all of the bridges had been cut, telephone communication had been cut, and some of the British troops out on the left flank, more specifically the 1st Northamptonshires and the 2nd King's Royal Rifles of the 1st Division, were out there on that extreme left flank, and they became totally isolated. At 8 p.m. the Germans launched their infantry assault, which pushed right through against these 2 British battalions, and they suffered something in the region of 70 to 80% casualties. With the bridges gone, they weren't able to cross this river, and so the only hope was for those men who could swim, and a lot of the men couldn't swim. So loads of men became isolated on the other side of the river. So with those British troops isolated on the other side of the river here, the German stormtroopers attacked down the coast. They used flamethrowers to clear out the dugouts as they went. And a lot of those men did try to retreat back and swim across the canal. But in reality, they were absolutely isolated, and they didn't have the ability to retreat. Sadly, of all the men who were defending the positions, only 4 officers and 64 men made it back to this side of the canal. Many of the casualties on the other side of the river there were lost, and we're going to be talking in a future video about the Nieuwpoort Memorial to the Missing, which sees some of the men there named, the men who were lost in the valiant defence of the position on the other side of the river here. Now, fortunately, the British did manage to hold the line here at the river, but of course that meant that the British position had moved from the far side to this side. So now we were in a situation where the Germans held the one side of the river there and the British held the other, facing off across the patch of water here where the Iser River goes out and meets the sea. Right, we're going to head back down to the beach to talk about what happened down there next. So after that attack on the 10th of July, that meant the British trenches were re-established this side of the canal. We're back now in the position on the beach on the southern side of the canal. And this is where the trenches ran into the beach here after that battle, and the Germans were just on the other side of the canal. And incredibly, there's a couple of photos which I've got and which actually look at this area now, and we can do a bit of a kind of a then and now comparison. So I'm going to pull out those photos and have a look at those now. Okay, so the first photo we're going to look at. Now, the thing to bear in mind here is that we are using the kind of, I think it's called Baines, but sort of almost like the jetty thing that runs out here into the sea. That's kind of our point of reference for this photo, because the first photo that we have got is this right here. Now, I'm also going to add this into the video to give you a better view of it, because my paper is blowing around here. But you can see on the far left of the photo those bains that run out to sea. Now, this is a member of the Lancashire Regiment, a bit more specifically the 4th Battalion of the East Lancashire Regiment in the trenches here at Nieuwpoort. This was taken on the 8th of September 1917, and you can see he is using a trench periscope to have a look over at the German lines. Wow. Okay, we've got another one here as well. Okay, so the next photo we've got is also a member of the East Lancashire Regiment, and this is another photo from the archives of the Imperial War Museum. And out here again, we're looking on the left-hand side of this photo. We're looking at the kind of bains there, sort of for reference. You can see them in the background. And here we've got a man taking a moment to sit on a barrel. I think this one was actually ever so slightly further back from the front line, so I think this one was probably filmed maybe slightly further out into kind of the beach direction here. But nonetheless, you get the idea of the photo. So I hope you guys enjoyed this initial kind of general look around the area of Nieuwpoort and telling the overview of the story of what happened here. In the next couple of videos, we're going to be looking at some of the locations around here. We're going to be looking at the Nieuwpoort Memorial. Sadly, whenever there is fighting, you will often find a memorial to the missing, and there's no exception to that here at Nieuwpoort. We're going to be looking at some of the Belgian sites around this area. We're going to be visiting a Belgian cemetery, and some things I'm really looking forward to over the next couple of days during my time here in Nieuwpoort. If you did enjoy this video and maybe looking forward to the series, do me a favour, do all the YouTube stuff right here on the screen. If you'd like to support what I do, you can do that via my Patreon page. The link is in the description to that. Or if you'd just like to help me kind of for a one-off occasion, that's totally fine too. You can always buy me a coffee, and the link to that is in the description as well. In the meantime, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I've really enjoyed it today, having a look around the area of Nieuwpoort. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.